Have you ever imagined the moment when you have to choose between your own safety and doing what you know is right, even knowing that this choice could cost you everything? When you look at an impossible situation and realize there's no good option, only a less bad one, and that whatever you decide will irreversibly change your life. Mara Sinclair experienced this moment on an empty road at 2 a.m. under torrential rain that made it impossible to see more than a few meters ahead, and the choice she made that night, 10 seconds of pure, instinctive decision, not only saved a stranger's life, it changed both their destinies in ways neither could have predicted. A rural mountain road, the kind that winds through dense pine forests and steep cliffs. No lighting, no houses for miles. Just wet asphalt, reflecting the lonely headlights of Mara's old car as she drove back to the isolated cabin where she lived alone. She'd gone to town for supplies, a monthly trip she hated, but was necessary, and now she was returning, exhausted, just wanting to get home, lock the door, and return to the safe solitude she'd chosen 6 years ago. The rain had started half an hour earlier, light at first, but it quickly turned into a downpour. The kind that makes windshield wipers work at full speed and still barely keep up. The kind that makes you slow down to 40 kilometers per hour because driving faster is suicide. And then she saw it, or almost didn't see it. A dark shape on the asphalt, larger than an animal, more substantial than a fallen branch. Mara braked instinctively hard, panic replacing reason. The car skidded dangerously on the wet road, its rear wheels sliding sideways before finally stopping meters from whatever was blocking its path. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear blood pulsing in her ears. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, and an automatic thought, I almost crashed. I almost lost control completely. She breathed, tried to calm her pulse, and looked through the rain-battered windshield to see what had almost killed her. It wasn't a roadkill. It wasn't a branch or debris. It was a body, human, a man, judging by his size, lying on his side in the middle of the road, completely still. And even through the rain, even with terrible visibility, Mara could see blood. Lots of blood, mixing with water, creating rust-colored puddles that spread across the asphalt. She should have stayed in the car. She should have driven around. Go home. Called the authorities there if she could get a signal, which was unlikely in that part of the mountain, but at least she would have tried. But she didn't. Because instinct, the same instinct that had kept her isolated and safe for years now, screamed that she couldn't simply let someone die when she was meters away. Mara got out of the car. Rain instantly soaked her clothes, clung to her skin, hair stuck to her face, cold penetrated to her bones. But she ignored the discomfort and ran to the body. She knelt down and saw the extent of the wound. A man, perhaps 40 years old, difficult to tell in the dark, was lying on his side, clothes torn. A dark jacket that had been navy blue or black was now soaked with blood and rain. A deep wound on his left side, just below his ribs. Not a gunshot wound. She had seen bullet wounds in movies and TV shows. It looked more like a knife wound, something sharp that had penetrated deeply, and he was bleeding. Not arterial gushing, but a steady flow. That meant he had minutes, perhaps, before losing too much blood. Sir, Mara said, her voice loud enough to be heard over the rain. Can you hear me? Nothing. No answer. She checked his pulse on his neck, weak, but present, shallow breathing. Unconscious then, not dead. Yet. Mara looked around. The road was completely deserted. No other car lights coming from any direction. No houses in sight. The nearest was at least 5 kilometers away. No help coming. She took her cell phone from her pocket. Soaked, but working. No signal. Of course. There was never a signal in this part of the mountains. Cell phone towers couldn't reach through the dense trees and deep valleys. She was alone, with a dying man, and she had to decide. Option 1, leave him there, drive home. Try to call emergency services. There her satellite phone had signal, even when her cell phone didn't. Explain the location. wait for an ambulance to arrive. It would take at least half an hour, probably longer in the rain. And the man would probably be dead by the time they arrived. Option 2, put him in the car, take him to her cabin 15 minutes away, try to stabilize him until she could get real help. But that meant taking a completely unknown stranger, potentially dangerous, to an isolated place where she lived alone. No neighbors, no witnesses, no protection if he posed a threat. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever had to choose between logic that says protect yourself and humanity that says you can't let someone die? Mara had one. And the choice wasn't difficult. Not really. Because she had learned it through years of being rejected by family, of being isolated by the city, of choosing solitude over connection because people disappointed her. What kind of person you choose to be matters. And the kind of person who drives past someone bleeding in the rain because helping is inconvenient or risky. That wasn't who she wanted to be, even if it meant risking everything. So Mara did what she had to do. She picked up the man heavy, completely lifeless, wet, making everything more difficult. Hand began to drag him, not gently. There was no luxury of gentleness, just the urgent need to move him from the asphalt to the back seat of the car before more blood was lost. She was strong years, living alone in the mountains, chopping her own firewood, carrying supplies, made you strong in ways that the gym never could. But he was heavy, and he was unconscious, and every meter seemed impossible. But she did it. She opened the back door. She pushed him inside, not concerned with delicacy now, only survival. She closed the door. She ran to the front. She started the car, and she drove. He drove through rain that had somehow worsened, along a road he knew by heart but which seemed alien and dangerous in the downpour. And every second, he was aware of the man in the back seat. Unknown, injured, possibly dangerous, certainly complicated. Stay with me until the end, because what Mara didn't know, what she couldn't have known while driving through the storm, with a bleeding stranger behind her, was that the man she had just saved was the county sheriff, and that he hadn't been attacked randomly. He'd been hunted by powerful people with secrets to protect, and that by saving him, Mara had placed herself directly in the crosshairs of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power in the city. That kindness of hers, simple act of not being able to ignore suffering, was about to drag her from safe isolation into the center of danger that could kill her. But it would also give her something she hadn't had in years: purpose, connection, and perhaps, if they survived, a chance to discover that loneliness didn't have to be permanent when you found the right person to share your life with. Mara drove with an intense focus that blocked out everything except the road ahead. Her hands gripped the steering wheel firmly, even as she trembled with adrenaline and cold. The windshield wipers worked frantically, barely able to keep up with the rain that seemed determined to obscure everything. And at every turn, every kilometer, she was hyper-aware of the man in the backseat. She could hear his shallow breathing, occasionally a low groan of pain when the car hit a pothole or took a sharp turn. Signs that he was alive. Still, for now, 15 minutes felt like hours. But finally, lights from the cabin appeared through the trees. A small wooden structure that her grandfather had built with his own hands 40 years ago. Isolated, surrounded by dense forest. No neighbors for miles. Exactly as Mara liked it. But now, for the first time, isolation seemed less like a choice and more like vulnerability. Because she was about to bring a wounded stranger inside. What if he was dangerous? What if he woke up violent? There was no one to hear if she screamed. No one to come and help. Just her and the choices she made. She parked near the front door, left the engine running, headlights illuminating the porch. She got out, into the rain, against torrential, with no sign of stopping, opened the back door, and began the difficult process of getting the man out of the car. More difficult than putting him in because she had to lift him, not just drag him. And she was exhausted now, adrenaline starting to wear off, but she managed, half dragging, half carrying, She managed to move him across the porch and into the cabin. Inside was warm. She had left the fireplace lit before leaving. A low fire, but enough to keep chill at bay. She managed to put him on the sofa, an old leather sofa that had seen decades of use. He groaned when she lowered him, but didn't wake up. Mara ran to the bathroom. She grabbed the first aid kit she kept stocked. Life in the mountains taught you to be prepared for emergencies, towels, water. She went back, and in the proper light for the first time, she truly saw the extent of what she was dealing with. The wound was worse than she had thought. A deep, jagged cut that cut through layers of tissue, still bleeding, but slower now. She wasn't a doctor. She had no formal training, but her grandfather had taught her the basics. In the mountains, you're your own doctor. You learn or you die. So she had learned how to clean a wound, how to apply pressure, how to recognize when something needed a hospital versus when it could be treated at home. This needed a hospital, definitely, but the hospital was 40 minutes away, and he probably wouldn't survive the trip without stabilization first. So Mara did what she could. She cut his shirt with scissors, exposing the wound completely. She cleaned up the blood as best she could. She poured disinfectant on him. He groaned louder, his body tensing, even unconscious. A good sign. It meant his nerves were still functioning. She applied gauze, pressed firmly, held it until the bleeding slowed to a trickle, and then a bandage, tight, as secure as she could manage. Without proper training, it wasn't perfect, but it was something. It bought time. If something like this has ever happened to you, if you've ever had to make an impossible decision where every option seemed wrong but doing nothing was worse, share in the comments, because Mara is not alone. We all face moments where humanity and self-preservation collide, and the choices we make define who we are. After the wound was covered, Mara sat in a chair opposite the sofa. She just sat, watching his chest rise and fall, processing what she had just done. She had brought a complete stranger home. A man who had been stabbed on accidentally. That was obvious. Someone had done it intentionally, which meant there was an attacker somewhere, possibly looking to finish the job. What if they came here? What if they followed a trail of blood, or simply checked houses in the area? She had just put herself in immense danger. But looking at the man's pale face, labored breathing, completely vulnerable, she couldn't feel remorse. Because the alternative was to let him die, and she couldn't live with that, no matter the risk. She picked up the satellite phone from the office. Large, old-fashioned, but functional, dialed 911, waited, and the line connected. 911. What is your emergency? I found a wounded man, stabbed. He needs an ambulance. What is your location, ma'am? Mara gave the address. Exact coordinates because rural addresses were complicated. Ambulance is on its way. Estimated. Time, 40 minutes. Is he conscious? No. He's breathing, but he's not waking up. Okay. Keep the wound covered. Apply pressure if he's bleeding. Don't try to move him anymore. Paramedics will be here soon. 40 minutes. An eternity when someone is dying. But what could she do but wait? Mara hung up. She went back to her chair and waited. She observed, and for the first time, she noticed details about the man she had saved. He was probably in his 40s. Dark hair with silver at the temples, a strong jaw under several days' worth of stubble, large, calloused hands, manual laborer, perhaps, or someone who used his hands regularly. His clothes were ordinary. Jeans, a flannel shirt under a jacket she had cut. Nothing to indicate who he was or why someone would stab him. But there was something about him, even unconscious, even wounded, that conveyed strength. A kind of presence that made you pay attention. And an old scar across his left eyebrow suggested that violence wasn't new. To him, he'd seen it before, survived it before. And Mara wondered, who are you? And why does someone want you dead? Answers would come, eventually. But for now, there was only waiting, and silence, and the sound of rain hitting a roof while two lifesers and his converged in ways neither had planned. If this part resonated with you, if you felt the tension of that moment when Mara realized she had crossed a point of no return, that she had chosen humanity over safety and now would have to live with the consequences, leave a like so I know. Because stories like this about people making the right choice, even when it's difficult, even when it's dangerous, need to be told. They need to be acknowledged. And the more we celebrate genuine kindness, the more we encourage others to make similar choices when faced with the impossible. The man began to stir about 30 minutes after Mara had called, not fully awake, but restless, groaning, head turning from side to side. And then his eyes opened, dark brown, disoriented. He tried to sit up. His body tensed, and he fell back with a muffled cry of pain. "Don't move," Mara said immediately, keeping her voice calm even though her heart raced. "You've been stabbed, you're injured. An ambulance is on its way." He looked at her, really looked, assessing, processing, and then around the cabin, taking stock of the situation. Where am I?" His voice was hoarse, dry. "My house, mountains, 15 kilometers outside of Ashford." She could see recognition pass through his eyes when she mentioned Ashford. She knew the area then. "How long?" he asked. "I found you, maybe 40 minutes ago. An ambulance should be here soon. Just stay still. Don't make the injury worse." He tried to sit up again. This time he managed, though his face grew even paler with the effort. "No," he said. "No ambulance. No hospital. You need to cancel." "What?" "No. You need real medical help. I only gave you basic first aid, but, please." Urgency in his voice. "Cancel the call. I'll explain. But please, trust me." And Mara looked into his eyes. She saw not madness, not paranoia, but genuine fear, and something else, determination. And against all judgment, against all logic, she found herself nodding. Okay, I'll cancel, but you explain. Now, if you want to follow the rest of this story, discover who this man really is, and why he's willing to die rather than go to the hospital, and find out how Mara's decision to help him will drag her into a conspiracy that threatens the entire city. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because what comes next, revelations about his identity, the danger they both face, and the growing connection between two people who had chosen isolation but find in each other a reason to risk it again, is the kind of journey that will keep you hooked from beginning to end. And I want you here for every revelation, every moment of tension, every impossible decision they will have to make. Together, Mara picked up a satellite phone. She called back. She explained it had been a mistake, that the man had woken up and wasn't as bad as she thought, that he didn't need an ambulance. Dispatcher tried to argue, but eventually accepted the cancellation. And when Mara hung up, the man visibly relaxed. "Thank you," he said, "for helping me, and for trusting me." "I still don't trust you," Mara corrected. "But I gave you the benefit of the doubt. Now explain. Who are you? And why did someone stab you and leave you to die on the road?" Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because to truly understand why Mara chose to risk everything by bringing a wounded stranger to the cabin, why she canceled the ambulance based solely on looking into his eyes, you need to know the journey that led her to that moment. You need to understand that her isolation wasn't just a preference or an eccentricity. It was armor carefully constructed through years of rejection and betrayal. And that the act of trusting that man, even partially, was a break from the pattern that had kept her safe, but profoundly lonely for over half a decade. Mara Sinclair was 29 years old and lived in an isolated cabin, 15 kilometers from the nearest town, Ashford. Population 8,000 by absolutely deliberate choice. Not because she was a wealthy heiress seeking philosophical solitude or an eccentric artist cultivating the image of a mysterious hermit, but because she had learned through repeated and painful experiences that people were complicated, that they disappointed, that they loved you until the moment loving you became inconvenient. and then disappeared with a speed that left you stunned. That family, a word that should mean security and unconditional loyalty, could be more cruel than strangers, because they knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. So Mara had chosen mountains, the silence of pine trees and streams. Isolation, that was loneliness, yes, but at least it was loneliness she controlled, that she chose, that she could trust because she had no expectations that could be broken. She worked remotely as a freelance illustrator, primarily digital art, children's books, corporate websites, marketing materials. Any client who paid reasonably and didn't require in-person meetings. She had built a solid portfolio over the years, a reputation for being reliable, talented, and completely professional, even though no one had ever met her personally. Most clients didn't even know where she lived, only that she delivered quality work on time. She earned enough to live modestly, $50,000 a year, depending on how many projects she accepted. Not rich, but comfortable. Enough to pay for utilities, buy supplies, maintain her cabin under repair, and save a small amount for emergencies. The cabin was completely hers. No mortgage, no landlord. Inherited from her grandfather, Sinclair, who had died when Mara was 23. Sudden heart attack while chopping wood. He died doing what he loved, in the place he loved. And he left room for the only person in the family who had truly cared about him. The only one who visited regularly, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely enjoyed his company. The will had been clear: cabin and surrounding property to my granddaughter Mara Sinclair. The only inheritance I have real value to give. To the only one who understands the value of peace over approval. Live well, darling. And don't let bastards grind you down. The last sentence was an inside joke. Something her grandfather used to say when Mara came home crying after a fight with her parents or brother. Don't let bastards grind you down. And she had tried. God, she had tried. But eventually, she had stopped fighting and simply left. The rest of the family, parents, Richard and Catherine, older brother Derek, were furious about the will. The cabin and 5 acres of surrounding land were valued at $250,000. Not a fortune, but significant money. And they thought it should be divided equally. Or rather, given to Derek because he was a man and needed it more. That Mara had manipulated her grandfather. That she had visited him in recent years only to secure her inheritance. Lies. All lies. But the family believed them because it was easier than admitting the truth. That Thomas had preferred his granddaughter, who truly loved him, to his children and grandson who only showed up on holidays complaining about how he should sell property and move to the retirement community. The family contested the will. They hired a lawyer. They alleged undue influence. They claimed Thomas was senile. They claimed Mara had abused the trust of an old man. The court examined the evidence. Thomas's doctor testified that he was completely lucid until the end. Neighbors testified that Mara had visited regularly for years, long before inheritance was a consideration. The will was upheld. The cabin legally belonged to Mara, and the family responded with total and complete excommunication. The mother sent a letter, not a phone call. A physical letter, as if Mara didn't deserve even the sound of her voice. You chose isolation over family. You chose ownership over relationships. Don't expect us to be here when you eventually realize your mistake and feel alone. You made your bed. Lie in it. The father simply stopped answering calls, blocked email, as if his daughter had died. Brother Derek was more direct in his cruelty. Text message, the last communication Mara received from any family member. You've always been selfish, always been strange, and now everyone sees it. You stole from family. You manipulated the old man, and you're going to live alone in the mountains, because nobody can stand you anymore. I hope it's worth it. I hope solitude is good company when you realize you've pushed away everyone who cared. And he blocked her, on all platforms. Facebook, Instagram, phone number. Years later, Mara would occasionally check their pages, public, because they were all obsessed with image, and see photos of family gatherings, Christmases, Thanksgivings, birthdays, deliberately without her, as if she had never existed. The space where she should have been was just empty, or filled by a random friend or partner. Erased completely. Mara had grown up in Ashford, a small town 30 kilometers down the mountain. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where reputation mattered more than truth. The Sinclair family was respected. Her father, Richard, was an accountant who did taxes for half the town. Her mother, Catherine, organized charity events, was part of a gardening club, and was seen as a pillar of the community. Derek had been a star football player in high school, popular, charismatic, and Mara never fit in. She preferred drawing to going to games. She preferred reading to socializing at parties. She asked questions that her family found embarrassing. Why does Dad drink every night if alcohol is a problem? Why does Mom take so many pills if you say drugs are bad? Why is Derek cruel to younger children, but you say he's a good boy? Questions a child asks when they see hypocrisy, but don't yet understand that pointing out hypocrisy is socially unacceptable. And her family reacted with anger, not reflection. Don't talk about your father like that. Your mother has migraines. She's not abusing anything. Your brother is just joking. You're too sensitive. And Mara learned to shut up, but she also learned not to trust. To see through facades. To recognize that the perfect family they presented to the world was a performance, and that she was an inconvenience who didn't conform to the script. At 18, the day after graduating high school, Mara left. Not dramatically, she simply took essential things, the bank account she had saved from part-time jobs, and left. She rented a room in a city, 2 hours away. She worked full-time as a waitress while attending community college, studying art and graphic design. She visited Grandpa Thomas whenever she could. Every weekend if she could get a ride or save enough gas. He had lived alone in the cabin since Grandma died a decade earlier. And unlike the rest of the family, he never judged Mara. He never said she was wrong for leaving. He only offered her safe space, honest conversations, and encouragement. Live authentically. That's all that matters. Not performance, not pleasing others, but being who you truly are. They were closer than Mara was to her own parents. And when he died suddenly, without warning, she grieved more deeply than she knew was possible. And when the will revealed that he had left her the cabin, she realized it was a gift. Not just property, but permission to live as she wanted. Isolated if she chose. Always authentic. And she had lived like that for 6 years. She moved to the cabin at 23. She set up freelance work. And she chose deliberate solitude. She visited Ashford only when absolutely necessary once a month for supplies she couldn't order online. She avoided conversation. She wore headphones even when music wasn't playing to signal "do not disturb me." And the town had opinions about her. Of course it did. Mara Sinclair. Oh yes, the one who stole her grandfather's inheritance and cut off her family. Gossip had distorted facts beyond recognition, manipulated an old man on his deathbed. Family tried to be reasonable, but she sued them. Lives alone because she's antisocial. Always been strange. Her reputation was irreparably tarnished. So when she went to town, people stared, whispered. Market cashiers were polite but cold. Once, a former high school art teacher, Mrs. Henderson, who had encouraged Mara's talent, saw her on the street. Mara waved. Mrs. Henderson looked directly at her. Her expression hardened, and she looked away. She pretended not to see, not to recognize. She rejected her silently but completely. And Mara realized, in Ashford's narrative, she was the villain. Not a victim of a dysfunctional family. Not a woman who had chosen authenticity over approval. But greedy, manipulative, a stranger who deserved isolation. There was no room for a more complicated truth. Only a simple story that confirmed their prejudices. So Mara stopped trying to correct them. She stopped caring what they thought. And she embraced isolation completely. 6 years of living alone, working alone, walking in the forest alone. safe but profoundly lonely in ways she didn't even admit to herself most days, until the night she found a bleeding man on the road. An instinct, the same instinct her grandfather had taught her, to help when you can, because it's right, overcame self-preservation, and she brought him home. And now she was sitting across from a stranger who had asked to cancel the ambulance, who had looked into her eyes with an urgency that was fear but also honesty. And against all judgment, all established norms of not trusting, she had agreed. Because something about him, vulnerability, determination, the way his eyes asked for trust without demanding it, resonated. And for the first time in 6 years, Mara made the choice to trust someone in person instead of keeping a safe distance. Not complete trust, but a beginning. And that would change everything. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the failure Mara experienced wasn't just isolated rejection or a temporary misunderstanding. It was systemic and deliberate betrayal by every person and institution that should have offered support. It was such complete erasure that sometimes she wondered if she had ever imagined having a family. If the connections she remembered were real, or just the fantasy of a lonely child. And the impact of this betrayal wasn't just physical isolation. It was a profound transformation of how she saw the world, from a place where kindness existed to a place where she had to constantly protect herself because trusting was an invitation to be hurt. Mara's family didn't simply reject her when her grandfather died and the will revealed that the cabin, valued at $250,000 after official inspection, had been left entirely to her. They erased her, systematically, deliberately, with a cruelty that took Mara years to fully process. When the will was read in Thomas's lawyer's office's small room with worn leather chairs and the smell of old paper, Father Richard had become visibly furious. Red face, jaw clenched. This is absurd. Father was clearly not in his right mind when he wrote this. The lawyer, an old man who had known Thomas for decades, had shaken his head. Thomas was completely lucid. I saw him the week before he died. We reviewed the will together. He knew exactly what he was doing. And why. She manipulated him, Mother Catherine said. Cold voice, accusatory, looking at Mara as if she were a stranger. As if she weren't the daughter she had given birth to, whom she had raised for 18 years. She spent years visiting him, making him think she cared, all for this. To steal an inheritance that should have been divided among the family. I didn't steal anything, Mara had said, her voice trembling but firm. Grandfather gave me the cabin because I was the only one who really visited, who cared about him as a person, not as a potential source of money. You showed up twice a year and complained about how he should sell property and move to the city, because we cared about his safety, Richard said. An old man living alone in the mountains. Dangerous. Irresponsible. We were trying to protect him. You were trying to control him, Mara corrected. Difference. Derek, his brother, a former star athlete who now worked in car sales and lived in a mortgaged apartment he could barely afford, was more direct. You've always been strange. Always caused trouble. And now this. Stealing from your own family. Dad protest. There has to be a legal way to fix this. And Richard tried. He hired a lawyer. A good one. An expensive one. He filed a petition alleging undue influence. Alleging that Thomas was senile. That Mara had abused the trust of an old and vulnerable man. That the will should be invalidated and the property divided equally among Thomas's 3 surviving children and 2 of Richard's brothers, who lived in other states and whom Mara barely knew. The process took 4 months. Months of depositions, of lawyers asking questions designed to make Mara seem calculating. How often did you visit your grandfather? Every week, when I could. Sometimes twice a week. And did you discuss his finances? No. We talked about life, art, stories about him building a cabin. Normal things that families discuss. But did you know he owned valuable property? Yes, obviously. I visited the cabin. But I didn't think about inheritance. It never crossed my mind. a partial lie. She had vaguely thought that the cabin would probably be sold when Thomas died and the money divided. But she never expected it to be all hers. She never asked. She never suggested it. The court heard testimony. Thomas's doctor testified that he was completely lucid until his death. Cognitive tests performed 6 months earlier showed normal mental function for his age. Neighbors, the few who lived close enough to be considered neighbors in a rural area, testified that Mara had visited regularly for years, that the relationship was genuinely loving, that Thomas frequently mentioned how grateful he was to have a granddaughter who cared. Thomas's lawyer read a statement that Thomas had written and left with his will. I know the family will question the decision to leave the cabin to Mara alone, but it's a deliberate choice made with a clear mind. Mara is the only one who visited because she wanted to, not out of obligation. The only one who heard stories. The only one who understood why I built this place, as a refuge from a world that demands conformity. She deserves it, and I hope it gives her the peace she needs. The court upheld the will. The judge said, evidence clearly shows that Mr. Sinclair was of sound mind, that he had valid reasons for the disposition he made, and that he had the right to dispose of his own property as an appropriate means. Petition denied. Richard had left the court, without looking at Mara. Catherine too. Derek paused long enough to whisper, "You'll pay for this, one way or another." And he did. Not legally, but socially, emotionally. Family responded with total excommunication. Mother sent a letter, not an email, not a call, but a physical letter, handwritten on good stationery, as if formality made it less cruel. Mara, you made a choice. You chose property over family. You chose isolation over connection. This speaks to character, to values, and it makes it clear that you don't share ours. Don't expect us to be here when you eventually feel alone and realize your mistake. You made your bed, now lie in it. Don't contact us again. You are not welcome in our home or in our lives. Signed, Catherine Sinclair, not mother, just her full name. As if the relationship had been officially dissolved. Father simply stopped responding. Calls went straight to voicemail. Emails bounced back, blocked. Once, Mara saw him at a supermarket in Ashford. She made eye contact, and he turned and walked in the opposite direction, deliberately, without acknowledging her, as if she were a stranger, worse than a stranger, as if she were nobody. Derek was even more cruel. He sent a text message there, last direct communication. You've always been selfish, always been different in the wrong way, and now everyone sees it. You manipulated the old man. You stole from the family that gave you everything, and you're going to live alone in the mountains because nobody can stand you anymore. Nobody wants you. Nobody ever did. I hope loneliness is good company when you realize too late that you've pushed away everyone who ever cared. And he blocked her. Phone number, Facebook, Instagram, email, everything. Years later, Mara, occasionally in moments of weakness, checked their social media profiles. All public because the Sinclair family loved to project an image of perfection. And she saw photos. Christmases, where everyone gathered at Richard and Catherine's house. Big tree, presents, smiles. And the empty space where Mara should have been was just unrecognized, or filled by Derek's friend or girlfriend, as if she had never existed. Thanksgivings were similar. Birthdays, graduations, when Derek eventually had children. Family growing, continuing. Without her, erased from the narrative, from history, from the collective memory they chose to keep, and the city. Ashford had strong opinions about Mara Sinclair. Gossip had started immediately after the will. Was Reed, have you heard about Mara Sinclair? No. What? She stole her grandfather's inheritance. The whole family cut her off. How did she steal it? She manipulated him. The old man was senile. She spent years brainwashing him to get property. Facts distorted beyond recognition. It didn't matter that the court had examined evidence and determined that Thomas was lucid. It didn't matter that Mara had visited out of love, not greed. narrative was more interesting than truth. And the narrative Ashford embraced was strange girl who had always been trouble, manipulated her grandfather, and stole a good family's inheritance. Reputation irreparably tarnished. When Mara went to the city reluctantly, only when absolutely necessary, people stared, whispered, not subtly. They wanted her to know they knew, that they judged. Supermarket cashiers were polite but cold. Total, $43.50. No conversation. No how are you, which they gave to other customers. Just a transaction. Once, Mara saw Mrs. Henderson, her high school art teacher, who had encouraged her talent, who had said, "You have real gift, Mara. Don't waste it on the main street." Mara had waved, genuinely happy to see a familiar face she associated with a happier time. Mrs. Henderson looked directly at her. Her expression, which had been neutral, visibly hardened, and she looked away, turned her head, began examining a shop window with sudden, feigned interest. Pretended not to have seen her, not to have recognized her, silently but completely rejected her. And Mara realized, in Ashford's narrative, she wasn't a victim of a dysfunctional family who had chosen authenticity over performance. She was the villain, greedy, manipulative, an oddball who had always been a problem and finally showed her true nature. There was no room for the more complicated truth, that she had been a sensitive child who asked difficult questions, that she had recognized hypocrisy and refused to pretend, that she had been punished for not conforming. Just a simple story. Oddball girl deceived her grandfather and now lives alone because she deserves solitude. And Mara eventually stopped trying to fix things, stopped explaining, stopped caring, or at least pretending not to care, which is a different way of saying the same thing. She embraced the isolation that had been forced upon her and turned it into a choice. Did the world see her as an antisocial hermit? Well, that's exactly what she would be. Lived alone for 6 years, worked alone, walked alone in the forest for hours, sometimes entire days, without seeing another human soul. And she told herself she preferred it that way, that people were complicated and disappointing, and that solitude was better than the inevitable betrayal that came from trusting, safe, but profoundly, devastatingly lonely in ways she didn't even admit in her private diary. Until the night she found a bleeding man on the road, and she had to choose between the self-preservation pattern that had kept her safe and the instinct for humanity that her grandfather had taught her. And she chose humanity. And now she was sitting in front of a wounded stranger who had asked to cancel the ambulance based solely on an urgent look. And against all logic, against all established norms, she had agreed. Because something about him resonated. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was tired of being alone. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the moment Mara truly began to pay attention, not just to his injury or immediate danger, but to who Jack fundamentally wasn't, when he woke up, begging to avoid the hospital. It was in the silent hours before that, when she sat in a chair observing the unconscious stranger and realized that for the first time in 6 years, she wasn't completely alone in the cabin, and that his presence, even bleeding and vulnerable, changed the atmosphere in ways she hadn't realized she missed until now. After Mara dragged the man into the cabinar, brutally difficult process that left her muscles trembling with exhaustion, and managed to get him onto her grandfather's old leather sofa. She lit an oil lamp. Electricity in the cabin was inconsistent at best. There was a generator that worked when needed, and solar panels that her grandfather had installed years ago that provided limited power. But Mara used both sparingly, preferring candles and oil lamps for most of her nighttime lighting. More reliable, quieter, and there was something about soft, flickering light that made solitude less oppressive. But tonight, she needed to see clearly. So she lit a large lamp, adjusted the wick until the flame burned steady and bright, and finally truly saw the full extent of what she was dealing with. The wound was bad, worse than she'd imagined in the dark and rain. A deep cut on his left side, just below his ribs. 5, maybe 6 inches long. Not a gunshot wound. She'd seen enough gunshot wounds in movies and TV shows to recognize the difference. It looked more like a knife, or something similarly sharp. The blade had penetrated deeply. He was still bleeding quite a bit, though slower now that he was lying down and not moving. His clothes were completely soaked, impossible to tell where the rain ended and the blood began. Dark navy blue jacket. Flannel shirt underneath that had been red and black, but was now mostly reddish-brown with dried blood. Jeans also soaked. Boots that had seen years of use. His face was pale. Not just pale from being indoors, but pale from blood loss. His lips were slightly bluish. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his body trying to compensate. He needed a hospital. Definitely real medical care. A transfusion, possibly. But the nearest hospital was in Ashford, 40 minutes away under normal conditions. 60, probably in the rain. And she didn't know if he would survive the trip, especially if he lost more blood. So Mara did what she could with the resources she had. The first aid kit she kept was well-stocked. Living alone in the mountains taught you to be prepared. Gauze, bandages, disinfectant, basic painkillers. Not enough for a serious injury, but better than nothing. She took kitchen scissors, cut his shirt, exposing the wound completely, and worked methodically. First, cleaning. She took a clean towel, moistened with warm water, and gently wiped the blood around the wound. She didn't want to cause more damage. Blood continued to flow, but more slowly now. Then disinfectant. She poured it liberally, directly onto the wound. He groaned, a low, unconscious sound, but indicating that his body still registered pain, even though his mind wasn't present. A good sign. It meant nerves were functioning. She applied gauze directly to the wound, thick layers, and then pressed firmly. Direct pressure to stop the bleeding. She held it for 5 minutes, that seemed like an eternity. Her arms trembling with effort, but when she lifted her hand, the bleeding had slowed to a mere trickle. Progress. Mara wrapped a bandage around his torso, tight, as secure as she could manage without proper training. It wasn't perfect work. A real nurse probably would have done much better, but it was what she had, and it would have to be enough. When she finished, she covered him with a heavy blanket she took from the linen closet. His body was beginning to tremble, probably shock, combined with blood loss and wet clothes. He needed warmth. Consider changing his clothes, putting on something dry, but that seemed like a violation. Invasive. So she just added another blanket, and waited. Checked his pulse in his neck. Weak but present. Rapid but regular rhythm. Breathing was shallow but consistent. Alive. For now. And so, because there was nothing more to be done medically without proper equipment, Mara sat in an old wooden chair in front of the sofa, and she observed. Not just monitoring vital signs, but truly observing, studying, the man she had brought home without knowing absolutely anything about him except that he was dying and she couldn't ignore it. The man was impressive, wasn't quite the right word, but definitely striking. Probably early 40s. Hard to say for sure given his condition. Dark hair that was wet and stuck to his forehead, but which she could see had gray strands at his temples. A sign of age or stress. A strong jawline under several days' worth of stubble. Not exactly unkempt, but clearly hadn't shaved recently. His hands were what truly caught Mara's attention. Large, calloused, the kind of hands that came from manual labor, or fighting, or both. Not the hands of a man who spent his days in an office typing. These were hands that built things, fixed things, broke things when necessary. And there were scars, small old ones, running across his knuckles and the backs of his hands. A history of violence, or at least rough physical contact. But what really intrigued her was his expression. Even unconscious. Most people relaxed when unconscious. Facial muscles loosened, expression became neutral. But not Jack. Even unconscious. His eyebrows were furrowed, jaw clenched, as if still fighting something in his dreams. As if his body was switched off, but his mind was still processing trauma. Still in survival mode, even when he couldn't do anything. And a scar, an old one, crossing his left eyebrow, maybe an inch long, healed long ago, but visible. This was a man who had seen violence before, multiple times. If other small scars Mara could see were any indication. The question was, victim or perpetrator? Someone who had been attacked repeatedly, or someone who was looking for a fight? Mara didn't know. But instinct, the same instinct that had made her stop on the road, that had made her drag him to the car, that had made her bring him to the cabin, told her he was a victim, that violence had been done to him, not by him, at least not this time, because nobody stabbed someone and left them on a deserted road unless they were trying to kill them. And people who committed killings were usually not victims. They were perpetrators, eliminating a witness or rival. But maybe she was wrong. Maybe she had brought a dangerous man home. A criminal. Someone who would wake up violent. Who would hurt her. Who would take advantage of her isolation. The thought made her stomach clench. But looking at him pale, bleeding, completely vulnerable, she couldn't believe it. She couldn't see a threat. Just a man who had been hurt and needed help. And she had given it. For better or worse. Hours passed slowly. Mara dozed off in the chair occasionally. Never deeply. Always partly aware of his presence. Of changes in his breathing. Of the possibility that he would wake up. Or worse, that he would stop breathing completely. But he continued. Stubbornly. Chest rising and falling. Pulse keeping rhythm. Fighting through trauma that would have killed a weaker person. And around 4 in the morning, the rain finally easing outside, reducing to a steady drizzle. Mara heard a change, a low groan, movement. She woke up completely, immediately alert. Jack's eyes snapped open, dark brown, confused, disoriented. He tried to sit up, automatic instinct, and groaned loudly when pain hit. He fell back against the sofa cushions. "Don't move," Mara said, keeping her voice calm, even though her heart raced. "You're hurt, badly. I found you on the road, brought you here." He looked at her. Really? Focused, processing words. Then looked around the cabin, taking stock, assessing location, potential threats, and she could see his mind working even through pain and disorientation. Training or experience, or both. Where am I? A hoarse voice, dry. My home, cabin in the mountains, 15 kilometers outside of Ashford. She saw recognition pass through his eyes when he mentioned Ashford. Then she knew the area. "Ashford," he repeated. Okay. He tried to sit up again. "Time," he managed, although clearly every movement caused pain. "How long was I unconscious?" "I brought you here maybe 2 hours ago. I called an ambulance. They should be here soon." "No," he said immediately, firmly. "No ambulance, no hospital. You have to cancel." "What?" "No. You need medical attention. This injury, please." Looking directly into her eyes. Urgency, fear even. "Cancel the call. I'll explain everything, but please, you need to trust me. I can't go to the hospital." And Mara should have refused. She should have insisted. But something in his eyes, not paranoia or madness, but genuine fear and raw honesty made her pause. "Why?" "Because the people who stabbed me will check hospitals. And they'll finish the job if they find me. And you'll be in danger too if you're connected to me. Protecting her, even wounded, even needing help." His first concern was not dragging her into further danger. And that, more than anything else, convinced Mara that instinct was right. "Okay," she finally said. "I'll cancel. But you owe me a full explanation." "Understood." "Understood." He extended his hand, trembling slightly but firm. Jack Moreno." She hesitated, then took his hand, calloused against her palm. Warm despite blood loss. Marta. Sinclair. And in that handshake, something passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. but recognition of two people who had reasons not to trust she because of years of betrayal. He, for reasons he hadn't yet explained, but who were choosing to trust anyway, even if only for one night, even if it meant risk. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the event that truly connected Jack and Martha transformed a chance encounter on the road into something profoundly more meaningful wasn't just the revelation of his identity. It was her conscious decision not to back down when she knew the full extent of the danger. It was the moment when she chose us instead of you, even knowing it meant putting herself directly in the line of fire. And it was the beginning of a transformation for two people who had chosen isolation, discovering that perhaps they didn't have to face the world alone. Jack slept for a few more hours after that first tense conversation. His body needed it. It was operating on depleted reserves, its adrenaline finally worn off. Mara watched him for a few minutes, making sure his breathing was steady, that there were no signs of worsening, then forced herself to step away. She gave him space. She went to the kitchen, where she could still hear but wasn't hovering, and she began the familiar morning routine that anchored her days. Coffee first. Always coffee. A manual grinder, because electricity was unreliable and she liked the ritual. The sound of beans being crushed, the rich aroma filling the small kitchen. Water boiling in a kettle on the wood-burning stove that she kept lit most of the time during the cold months. A slow but meditative process that usually calmed her mind. But this morning, her mind was far from calm. It kept returning to the man on the couch. Jack Moreno, sheriff, investigating corruption, stabbed by people trying to silence him, and now hiding in her cabin because he couldn't trust his own department. The magnitude of the situation kept hitting her in waves. She had brought not only a wounded stranger, but an active target home. People were hunting him. What if they found out he was here? They would come, and she would be in the way. She should have been terrified. Part of her was. But a larger part that had been dormant for years, felt something different. Purpose, significance, for the first time since her grandfather died. Something mattered beyond the next project deadline, or whether there was enough firewood chopped for the week. The sun began to rise around 6, still cloudy. The rain had lessened to a fine but persistent drizzle. The kind of weather that made you want to stay inside, drink coffee, and watch the mist drift through the trees. Mara emptied 2 mugs. She picked one up and heard movement from the living room. Jack was waking up. She waited. A moment passed, and then she went over. Jack was sitting now, not reclining, but actually sitting, carefully testing movement. Hand pressed against the side where a bandage covered a wound. His face still pale, but less so than before. Determination in his eyes replacing the disorientation of hours earlier. "How are you?" Mara asked, keeping her tone neutral. "Alive," Jack said, attempting dry humor. "Hurting like hell, but functional. The wound is bad, but it didn't hit anything vital. I was lucky. Or the attacker had bad aim. Also, possible coffee," Mara offered, raising an extra mug. Jack nodded. He accepted the mug with a hand that trembled only slightly. He drank, and she saw relief spread across his face. "Good," he said. "Really good, thank you. The only thing I consistently do well." A small smile that surprised even herself. "Thank you," Jack said after a moment, "for helping me, for not giving me away, for everything. You didn't have to do any of that. I couldn't just let you die on the road," Mara said. The same answer she'd given before, but now with context. "Yes, I could have," Jack said, looking directly at her. "Most people would have." Strange man. Bleeding. In the middle of the night. During a storm. On a deserted road, where no one would. "No, you drove past." 99 out of 100 people would have driven past. Called a safe phone later maybe. But not stopped. Not risked it. But you did. Why? Mara considered it. She had answered this before, but he deserved a more complete answer. A more honest one. Because I learned mainly through my grandfather that the kind of person you are matters more than security or convenience. That ignoring suffering when you can help turns you into the kind of person I don't want to be. And she paused. And because I lived 6 years completely isolated, I chose that. But that choice was based on protecting myself from more pain, not on real values. What if I let you die to maintain security? It would prove that isolation had turned me into exactly the kind of person my family always said I was. Selfish, cold, and I refused to prove them right. A vulnerability she hadn't planned to share, but it came out anyway. Jack studied her so intensely that it made Mara want to look away, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "You live alone here?" he asked. "Yes, 6 years now. Family. Complicated. They cut off contact when I inherited this property. They thought it should be divided. I disagreed. Then they erased me." A brutal summary of years of pain. Jack nodded. A recognition of family dynamics he understood even without details. "And you're not afraid? Living alone. Now bringing in a wounded stranger who just admitted that dangerous people are hunting." "I should be afraid," Mara admitted. "Probably very stupid of me, but..." She shrugged. "Instinct told me you needed help, and that you weren't a threat to me, so I helped. Risky. Absolutely. But it felt right." "Instinct?" Jack repeated, thoughtful tone. "You rely on it a lot." "It's practically all I have," Mara said. "I've lived alone long enough to learn to trust my own judgment because there's no one else to consult. And instinct has kept me safe so far. For the most part. And it brought me here," Jack said. "Not accusation. Observation. Yes. And it brought you here. Which may have been a massive error of judgment. Time will tell." And there was raw truth in that which Jack recognized and appreciated. No platitudes, no pretense, just honesty. He was indeed that kind of person, a man who lived by instinct, because the system that was supposed to protect and serve often failed spectacularly. Who had learned to trust intuition over protocol when protocol was corrupted. They sat in silence for minutes, not uncomfortably, but contemplatively. Both processing the situation, the magnitude of what had happened, of decisions made in seconds that completely altered trajectories. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "I need to tell you something. You deserve to know exactly who you brought home, and what real danger you're facing now. Okay?" Mara said, getting ready, putting down her coffee mug. "I'm Sheriff," Jack began. "County Sheriff. Ashford County, and all incorporated areas around it. Full name is Jack Marino. I served as a law officer for 15 years, the last 3 as an elected sheriff. And 6 months ago, I started noticing irregularities. City contracts always going to the same construction company, Dalton Enterprises, regardless of how ridiculously high the bid was. Properties being bought by the city at massively inflated prices. Campaign donation records that didn't match reported spending." He paused. He drank his coffee. He continued. "I started investigating. Discreetly. Gathering documents, recordings, evidence of a corruption scheme that went from Mayor Richard Dalton through half the city council and possibly several officials in my own department. We're talking millions of dollars embezzled over 5 years. Taxpayer money going into private pockets. And Tuesday, 3 days ago, I made a mistake. I confronted an official I thought I could trust. Deputy Marcus Webb, 20-year veteran, good reputation. I showed him some of the evidence. I asked for help. He was involved," Mara guessed. "Up to his neck," Jack confirmed. "Marcus agreed to help. Said he needed to check some things. And Wednesday night, he called me to a meeting. Rural road. Isolated. Said he had more information, that I should come alone. And you went, and I went, because I trusted. And Marcus was there, with 2 men I didn't recognize. Hired muscle, probably. And Marcus said, 'Sorry, Jack, but you should have let it go. Nothing personal.' And they attacked me." Jack touched his wound. "I fought. I managed to escape, but not before this. Stabbed, they stole my phone, physical documents I had with me, and I ran, bleeding, in the rain, 4 miles, until I collapsed on that road where you found me. And they'll come looking for me, Mara said. No question. Statement. Marcus knows these mountains. He knows there are only a few roads. And he'll check every cabin, every property, until he finds me. And when he finds me, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. And now you know, Jack said, looking directly into her eyes. And that puts you in danger too. Because if they find out you helped me, that you hid me, you become a witness, or an accomplice in their eyes. And they'll come after you. It should have terrified her. It should have demanded she leave immediately. Called the police real federal, someone outside the corrupt local system. Protected herself. But instead, Mara felt a strange clarity. A purpose that hadn't made sense in years. Do you still have evidence? Or just what Marcus took? I have a backup, Jack said. Digital, in the cloud. But I need access. And I need to send it to the right people before they find me. Because if I die before exposing this, the truth dies with me. And Dalton and Marcus and the rest of them keep robbing the city for years. So what do we need to do? Mara asked. And Jack paused, processing the pronoun. We, yes, we, you're hurt, in hiding, hunted, and I have internet, a computer, and a house. That nobody watches because nobody cares about strange mountain hermits. So, what do we need to do? Jack looked at her with an expression that was part surprise, part respect, and part something deeper that neither of them was ready to name yet. Because the woman he had met only hours ago, who had every right to protect herself, to retreat, to avoid complication, was choosing to stay. She was choosing us, and that changed something fundamental. First, Jack said slowly, I need to access backups and send them to investigative journalists and the FBI. People I can trust outside the local system. Do you have a computer? Yes, satellite internet. Slow, but it works. Second, we need to prepare for the possibility that Marcus comes, that he checks here, and you need the story. You saw me on the road. You drove past because you were scared. You didn't stop. You didn't help. You don't know anything. Lying to a law enforcement officer, Mara said. Ironic, considering you're sheriff. Lying to a corrupt officer trying to commit murder, Jack corrected. Important difference. And Mara nodded, because it was a difference. And because for the first time in 6 years, she wasn't alone in the cabin. There was someone. There was purpose. And there was real danger. But also something more. Connection. The beginning of trust built not on time or familiarity, but on choices made under pressure. And that, he discovered, was worth the risk. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the escalation of danger wasn't gradual or predictable. It was sudden. It was a moment where the theory of they might come looking for us transformed into the concrete reality of they're here, now. And it was an immediate test of whether Mara was truly prepared for the consequences of the choice she had made. Because it's one thing to say I'll help when danger is abstract. It's something else entirely when you hear a car engine coming down the dirt road that leads only to your isolated cabin, and there's no more time to reconsider. Only time to act. Jack explained the whole situation as Mara led him to the small office she had set up in a back room of the cabin. A place where he worked on illustrations. A desk with a 5-year-old desktop computer that still worked. A graphics tablet. Sketches scattered about. He spoke through a 6-month journey investigating corruption that had started with small irregularities and grown into a massive conspiracy. Municipal contracts that always went to Dalton Enterprises, a construction company owned by Mayor Richard Dalton's brother, regardless of how much lower other bids were. We're talking about differences of 30–40%. A paving project that should have cost $200,000 being given to Dalton for $320,000. City Hall renovations that should have cost $500,000, costing $800,000, repeatedly. And properties. The city buying land at absurdly inflated prices. An empty lot valued at $50,000 being bought for $200. And guess who was selling? LLCs that, when you traced them through layers, always came back to Richard Dalton or Associates. Campaign donation records showing massive contributions that didn't match reported spending. Money disappearing. Millions over 5 years. And at the center of it all, Mayor Richard Dalton. A 60-year-old man. Charismatic. Respected. 3 terms. Seen as a pillar of the community. Completely corrupt. Jack had meticulously gathered evidence. Public contract documents. Property records. Bank statements obtained through warrants. Recordings of conversations where Dalton openly discussed the scheme because he thought he was safe. 6 months of work. Solid case. Ready to take to the prosecutor. And then he had made a mistake. Tuesday, 2 days ago, he confronted Deputy Marcus Webb, a man Jack had known for 10 years, whom he had trained when Marcus was new to the department, whom he had promoted to senior deputy, whom he implicitly trusted. I showed him some of the evidence, not all of it, but enough to demonstrate scale, and I asked for help. I said I needed to check who else in the department might be involved before going public, and Marcus agreed. Said he needed time to process, that he would call. Wednesday night, Marcus called. I have more information, things you'll want to see. Meet me. Old Mill Road, midnight. Come alone. And Jack, trusting him, went. Old Mill Road was rural, isolated, used mostly by logging trucks. At midnight, it was deserted. Jack arrived. He saw Marcus's pickup truck and 2 other cars he didn't recognize. It should have been a warning. But he thought Marcus had brought allies, other trusted officers. He got out of his own car, and Marcus was there. With 2 men Jack definitely didn't recognize. Big. The kind you'd see at the gym or working security, not cops. Marcus. Jack had said, confused. What's going on? Sorry. Jack, Marcus replied. His tone was genuinely apologetic, but firm. You're a good man, a good sheriff, but you should have let it go. Some things are bigger than the law, and you chose the wrong side. What? You're involved. Realizing too late? For 15 years, since before you were elected, and I'm not going to let you destroy everything because of a misguided sense of justice. They attacked. The 2 men. Quick, efficient. Jack thought he had training, experience, but it was 2 against 1, and he hadn't expected it. He managed to land a few blows. He knocked one down, but the other had a knife. Jack felt a sharp pain in his side. Hot, wet, and he knew he'd been stabbed. Survival instinct kicked in. There was no reasoning, just escape. He pushed his attacker away. He ran, literally ran into the woods beside the road. He heard Marcus shout, "Don't let him get away. Find him," and they chased after him. Jack ran, bleeding, through trees. The rain had started, a storm coming fast, and he used the rain and darkness as cover. He lost them eventually, but he was wounded, losing blood, and he'd run for miles, collapsed on a different road, where Mara found him. And they're going to come looking, Jack said now, sitting in Mara's office chair as she stood nearby. Marcus knows these mountains better than anyone. He grew up here, he hunted here. He knows every road, every trail, every cabin, and he knows I couldn't have gone far wounded, so he's going to check systematically every property within a 15-20 kilometer radius of where he attacked me. How much time do we have? Mara asked, processing urgency. Hours, maybe less. They probably started as soon as it got light, checking roads, looking for blood. My car is still on Old Mill Road, so they know I'm on foot. Limited. Then you need to leave now. I'll drive you. No, Jack interrupted firmly. If they see you with me, you become a target, a witness, or an accomplice. Marcus won't hesitate to eliminate you too. No, I'll go alone. But I need a favor first. He looked at the computer. Do you have internet? Satellite. Slow, but it works. I need to send files. I have a backup of all the evidence in the cloud. encrypted storage. If I can access and send it to the right people, investigative journalists, the FBI, the federal prosecutor, before Marcus finds me, it doesn't matter what they do to me. The truth comes out. The case is exposed. They lose. Mara nodded. She turned on the computer. The satellite internet took a minute to connect. Slow, as she warned, but functional. Jack sat down. He opened his browser. He navigated to the cloud storage service. He logged in and stopped. Two-factor authentication screen. Shit, what? Mara asked, leaning over his shoulder. I need a two-factor authentication code. Extra security. They sent it to my phone via SMS. He slammed his fist on the table in frustration. And Marcus has my phone number. He took it when they attacked me. Without the code, I can't access it. Files are locked. Is there another way to receive the code? Email? App? Only by phone. I set it up that way because it was safer. Ironic now. Defeat in his voice. 6 months of work. Evidence that could expose massive corruption and send dozens of people to prison, blocked because he didn't have a phone. Did you have a physical backup? Mara asked, trying to help. Yes, USB drive, small red. It was in my jacket pocket when Marcus attacked me. She paused. They probably took it too. Checked pockets. Took wallet, phone, keys. Probably the drive too. Wait, Mara said. Sudden memory. When I cleaned you up. When I took off your wet clothes. Empty your pockets. Put everything in a plastic bag in the kitchen. I didn't throw anything away. She ran to the kitchen. Opened the drawer where she'd kept his belongings. A freezer bag with a wet leather wallet. A bunch of keys. Some coins. And a small red USB drive. She grabbed everything. Ran back. There, she handed him the drive. Jack looked at the small device as if it were the Holy Grail. You kept it. You kept everything. Of course I kept it, Mara said. They're your things. I wasn't just going to throw them away. Most people would have, especially when dealing with a bleeding stranger. But you paid attention. You were careful. You cared about details, even in the midst of the crisis. Looking at her was something new in his expression. Recognition, respect, the beginning of trust that went beyond circumstance. It's who I am, Mara said, shrugging as if it were no big deal. But it was, and they both knew it. Jack plugged the drive into the computer. He copied files, dozens of them, PDFs of contracts, spreadsheets of financial records, audio files of recordings, and he began composing emails. First, to Sarah Chenan, investigative journalist at a regional newspaper who had a reputation for not being intimidated. Then to Daniel Morrisona, national reporter covering government corruption. Then to the FBI, a specific agent Jack knew from law enforcement conferences, who had a reputation for being clean. Then to the federal prosecutor, for emails, each with complete attachments, each with a note, evidence of massive corruption in Ashford County. Mayor Richard Dalton and associates. Millions embezzled. Law enforcement officials compromised, including Deputy Marcus Webb. I am being hunted for exposing this. If anything happens to me, publish everything. He pressed send. Slow connection took minutes. Progress, bar crawling. 60%, 70, 85. And then they heard it. A distant but unmistakable sound. A car engine. Not on the main road, but on a dirt road that led specifically to Mara's cabin. A road no one used except her, because it didn't go anywhere else. The engine getting louder. Closer. Jack looked at the screen. 92%. Let's go, he murmured. Let's go. They're coming here, Mara said, stating the obvious but needing to say it aloud, to make it real. Yes. What do we do? You stay calm. Answer the door. Say you saw me on the road, but drove past because you were scared. Didn't stop. Doesn't know anything. And I, 98%, 99, 100%. Jack closed the computer, unplugged the drive, put it in his pocket. I hide, and if they find me, I fight. But at least the evidence is with the right people now. The engine stopped. The sound of car doors slamming. Voices. Mara recognized one. Marcus Webb. She'd seen him in town. She knew who he was. And another voice she didn't recognize. Footsteps on the porch. Where? Jack asked urgently. Mara pointed. The closet in the bedroom. The big one. The false bottom Grandpa built. Hide it there. Jack moved. Quickly, despite his injury. He disappeared into the bedroom, and Mara took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, tried to look like a woman who had just woken up, not a woman hiding an injured law enforcement officer from a corrupt deputy trying to commit murder. A knock on the door, loud, authoritative. Sheriff's Department. Opened the door. In danger that had been abstract, the theory of maybe they'll come suddenly became very, very real. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because the dilemma Jack faced in those seconds before Mara opened the door wasn't just tactical, it was moral. It was a choice between self-preservation and protecting someone who had become important in ways he could barely articulate. And it was a moment where he had to confront a hidden truth about himself, that years as sheriff, making practical and logical choices, had eroded part of his humanity. And that Mara woman he had met only hours before was making him remember what it meant to choose person over protocol, even when it meant maximum risk. Jack had seconds to decide. Literally seconds, as the knocking on the door echoed through the small cabin and Marcus's voice, a voice Jack knew so well, that he had trusted for years, shouted department identification. And Jack's mind, trained by 15 years of law enforcement, processed options at impossible speed. Option 1, run. The back door was maybe 10 meters away. The forest began immediately beyond the yard. Dense, mountainous, he knew basic survival. He could disappear, and leave Mara to deal with Marcus. She would tell the truth. I didn't see anyone. I don't know anything. And it would be plausible. A lonely woman living in isolation would have no reason to lie to a law enforcement officer. Marcus would check the cabin. He wouldn't find anything. He would leave. And Mara would be safe through genuine ignorance. But there was a flaw in that logic. Marcus was paranoid now. He knew Jack had escaped. He knew he was wounded and vulnerable. And he probably knew through emergency call records that someone in this area had called an ambulance and then canceled. Too much of a coincidence. So even if Mara was telling the truth, Marcus would be suspicious. And desperate men do desperate things. He could hurt her trying to extract information she didn't have. Option 2, stay. Confront Marcus directly. But Jack was wounded, still bleeding, though Mara's bandage had slowed the flow. Weak from blood loss. Against Marcus, unaffected, armed, probably with backup, the chance of victory was minimal. And fighting would put Mara directly in the line of fire. Literally. If shots were fired, she would be in the middle. Option 3, hide and let Mara lie. She would say she saw him on the road. Drive past, scared, didn't stop. Plausible story. A woman alone in the middle of the night, seeing a strange, bloodied man. Of course, she wouldn't stop. Marcus would believe her, because it confirmed what he expected, that women were cautious. That Mara, in particular, was isolated and distrustful. He would check the cabin. Jack would have to hide perfectly, make no sound, leave no evidence, and pray that Marcus wouldn't find anything risky. But it gave Mara a plausible deniability. Protection through a convincing lie. And if Jack were caught, at least she could honestly say she was terrified, that he had forced her, that she didn't know who he was. Innocence through fabricated coercion. Jack looked at Mara, the woman who had saved his life, who had risked everything bringing a stranger home, who deserved protection, not betrayal. And he realized that the choice wasn't really about tactics. It was about what kind of man he was. The kind who used people as shields, or the kind who protected even when it cost him. He had failed before. 6 months ago, when he started the investigation, he had prioritized the case over security. He hadn't told anyone outside the department what he was doing because he wanted credit. He wanted to be the hero who exposed corruption, and ego had almost killed him. He had trusted Marcus, a veteran who seemed solid without thoroughly checking. He had been lazy, arrogant, and Marcus had betrayed him because Jack hadn't done his homework properly. And now he was about to do the same to Mara. Use her as cover while saving his own skin. No, not again. A louder knock, now. Open the door, now. Marcus was losing his patience. Jack grabbed Mara's hand, quickly, urgently. Listen carefully, he said, his voice low but intense. Say you saw me, but only from a distance, on the road. Old Mill Road maybe, or nearby. That you were coming home. Saw a man walking. He looked injured, but you didn't stop because you were scared. A woman alone, a bloody stranger. You locked the doors and drove past. You didn't stop. You didn't help. You don't know anything beyond that. Okay? Why this story specifically? Mara asked, processing quickly. Because it's plausible. Because it explains why you might have seen something without being involved. And because... He paused. Final decision. Because if they hurt you trying to make you tell me where I am, if Marcus uses force, intimidation, anything, I'd rather die than live, knowing I didn't protect you properly. And there was raw truth in that. Vulnerability that Jack rarely showed. Because he had lived for years as sheriff, making practical choices. Sacrificing personal relationships for work. Divorced for 3 years because his wife couldn't stand being second priority after his badge anymore. No children because he never had time. No real friends because he didn't trust easily. A life built in functional isolation, not unlike Mara's. And now, confronted with the possibility that his decision could lead to her being hurt, he realized he couldn't live with that. He couldn't make a practical choice if it meant sacrificing the person who had shown more genuine humanity in 6 hours than most showed in years. Another knock, louder, the sound of something hitting wood, trying to force it open. Last chance. Open up or we'll break it down. Go, Jack said. Talk to them. Sell the story, I'll hide. And if they find you, I'll fight. But you won't be hurt for helping me. I promise. Mara looked into his eyes and saw something that surprised her. Not fear for himself, but genuine fear for her. And she realized, this man she had known as a bleeding stranger on the road was willing to die to protect her, not because he should, but because that was who he fundamentally was, when real choices mattered. Wardrobe in the room, she said quickly. False panel at the back. Grandfather built it as an emergency hiding place. Push hard in the lower right corner. Opens to a small space. Fits to crouch. Thank you. And Jack. She held his hand for a moment longer. Survive. Because if he dies saving me, I'll be very angry. Almost a smile. An attempt at lightness in an impossible moment. Then she let go of his hand and went to the door, while Jack disappeared quickly and silently into the room. Mara took a deep breath. She smoothed her hair. She rubbed her eyes too. Looked like she'd just woken up, not difficult, given how exhausted she was. And she opened the door. Marcus Webb was on the porch, a man in his 50s. Stocky but not fat. The kind who'd spent years carrying equipment and doing regular physical training. Deputy's uniform with a gold badge gleaming even under the cloudy sky. And another man, probably one of the attackers. Tall, maybe 30, a scar across his cheeks, not wearing a uniform, just jeans and a jacket. Contracted muscle, Mrs. Marcus said. Authoritative tone, but not aggressive yet. Tactics, start politely. Sinclair, Mara said. Mara Sinclair. This is private property. What can I do for you? Deputy Marcus Webb, showing her badge as if she couldn't see clearly. This is my associate. We're looking for a wounded man. Dangerous. Possibly in the area. Have you seen anyone? Mara forced a confused expression. When last night, early morning, within the last 12 hours, pausing as if thinking, yes, I saw it. Last night, maybe midnight, I was coming back from town. I saw a man on the road. Old Mill Road, near the intersection with Pine Ridge. Walking. He looked injured maybe. He was holding his side. Dark clothes. But I didn't stop. Why not? Marcus asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Why didn't I stop? Mara repeated, letting disbelief seep into her voice. Because I'm a woman driving alone in the middle of the night, and there was a strange, bloody man on the road. I locked the doors and sped off. I'm not stupid. Selling perfectly. The right mix of defensive fear and self-preservation logic. Marcus steadied her. Are you sure you didn't stop? Didn't offer help? Absolutely. Look, I live alone here. I don't have family nearby. I'm not going to stop for a potentially dangerous stranger. I'm sorry if you needed help, but my safety comes first. And you drove straight home? Yes. I arrived around 12:15 a.m. I locked the doors, and I went to sleep. A lie, but convincing. And the timeline was vague enough not to be easily checked. Marcus exchanged a glance with his associate. Does it matter if we look around? Just to make sure the area is secure. Do you have a warrant? Mara asked, remembering what Jack had murmured earlier. Marcus smiled. Not in a friendly way. I don't need a warrant if you consent voluntarily. Then I don't consent, Mara said firmly. This is private property, and I'm not going to let strangers search my house without proper legal reason, even if it means protecting you from a dangerous man. If he's as dangerous as you say, then you should be looking urgently. I saw him on the road near Pine Ridge. Maybe you should check there instead of wasting time. Here. Logic that was hard to argue against. Marcus considered, and Mara could see the calculation at play. Forcing entry without a warrant would create legal problems. And if Jack wasn't here, it was a waste of time. But if he was... All right, Marcus said finally. But if you see anything call immediately. He handed over his card. My direct number. Sure, Mara said, taking the card. And she closed the door, locked it, and waited, listening. Low voices outside. Then footsteps. Engine starting. Car driving away. Silence. She waited a full 5 minutes, making sure they were really gone. And then she whispered, Jack. They're gone. He emerged from the room, pale, sweating. You were perfect. Completely convincing. I lied to a law enforcement officer, Mara said. First time in my life. You lied to a corrupt officer trying to commit murder, Jack corrected. There's an important moral difference. And Mara nodded, because there was. And because she had made a choice. Not just to shelter Jack, but to actively protect him. To lie to authority. To risk legal consequences. And she didn't regret it. Not one bit. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the transformation that occurred in the days following that tense encounter at the door wasn't just about Jack recovering physically or Mara providing shelter. It was about two people both deeply wounded by past betrayals. Both having chosen isolation as protection, slowly discovering that shared vulnerability could create a different kind of strength. It was a journey of late-night conversations, where truths were revealed not because they had to be, but because there was finally someone who felt safe enough to trust. And it was a gradual recognition that the connection they were building went beyond circumstance, and became something fundamentally more meaningful. In the following days, Jack stayed. There was no real choice. Leaving was suicide. Marcus was hunting, probably monitoring roads, checking with informants. And Jack's wound, though not fatal thanks to Mara's care, still needed time to heal, so he stayed. And the cabin that had been Mara's solitary domain for 6 years suddenly had two presences. Change was strange, but not unpleasant. The first full morning after Marcus left, Mara woke up and for a moment forgot Jack was there. She came to the kitchen in her pajamas, old sweatpants, and a worn-out t-shirt, expecting her usual solitude, and found Jack already awake, sitting at the table awkwardly making coffee with one hand while holding the side with the other. You should be resting, Mara said. I can't sleep anymore, Jack replied. And I thought, coffee, But your system is different from mine. Looking at the manual grinder in French press as if they were aliens. Let me do it, Mara said, taking control. And they established a routine. She made coffee. He sat and watched, asking occasional questions about how she lived so isolated. Don't you miss people? I used to, Mara admitted. The first few months were difficult, but you adjust. You find a rhythm. And eventually, solitude becomes normal. I know that feeling, Jack said, a tone that suggested his own history of self-imposed isolation. Over the course of days, they talked. They really talked in ways that went beyond small, polite conversation. Jack told him about his career, how he had become a police officer at 23. I wanted to make a difference. Kind of a cliché, everyone says, but I really believed it. I grew up in a neighborhood where police officers were either heroes or enemies, depending on how they treated you. I wanted to be the kind who helped. He worked patrol for 5 years, promoted to detective, good at his job, maybe too good. Because he made enemies investigating the wrong people who were connected. I learned early on that politics mattered more than justice sometimes. That turning a blind eye to certain crimes was expected if the victim had no power. He ran for sheriff because he thought an elected position would give him more autonomy. If people elected me, I couldn't be easily silenced. He won 3 years ago. And for 2 years, he did a decent job. He cleaned up the department, improved response times, built trust with the community. And then he started noticing irregularities. Contracts that didn't make sense. Money disappearing. And when I started digging, I discovered that corruption went deeper than I imagined. Not just the mayor, but council members. Some of my own officers. The whole network. He spent 6 months secretly investigating. And the worst part, now that evidence has been sent, I don't know if it reached the right people. Emails may have been intercepted or ignored. And I'm stuck here not knowing if the sacrifice was worth anything. Mara also shared about family, about growing up in a home that seemed perfect on the outside, but was dysfunctional on the inside. Dad drank, not violent, just absent, emotionally unavailable. Mom compensated with anxiety pills that she took very liberally. And brother Derek was golden, he could do nothing wrong in their eyes. And I was complicated. I asked questions. I didn't conform. About leaving at 18, working, to pay for college, visiting her grandfather, who was the only person who truly saw her. And when he died and left me a cabin, the family was furious. Not because they cared about property, really, but because it validated what they always suspected, that I was strange, an outsider, that I didn't belong. About 6 years of self-imposed isolation, and now you're stuck here with me. Irony I haven't lost. I'm not trapped, Jack said, looking directly at her. I'm being protected. By you. There's a difference. And there was. Mara knew, because she wasn't doing it out of obligation. She was doing it because she wanted to. And recognizing that Jack saw her help as a gift, not a burden, meant more than he probably realized. Days developed a rhythm. Mornings were coffee and quiet conversations. Jack helped with what he could, despite his injury. He chopped wood once, before Mara stopped him because it was clearly hurting. He fixed a hinge on a cabinet that had been broken for months. I need to do something. I can't just sit here. Afternoons, Mara worked on illustrations, while Jack rested. But often they ended up in the same room. She at the graphics tablet. He reading books from her shelf. A companionable silence that required no filling. Evenings were when real conversations happened. After dinner, Mara was cooking proper meals for the first time in years, because she had someone to cook with besides herself. And there was a strange satisfaction in making food that someone else enjoyed. They would sit down, sometimes with cups of tea, and they would talk about everything. Were you ever married? Mara asked one night. Once. A long time ago. We divorced 3 years ago. What happened? Work. Always work. She used to say she was married to her badge, not to me. And she was right. I prioritized my career over my relationship. And eventually, she gave up competing. A tone of regret. Regrets. Many. But mostly that I didn't realize what I was missing. Until I had already lost it. That pride and obsession with making a difference cost me a relationship with someone who truly mattered to me. Mara understood this. I deliberately chose isolation, but sometimes I wonder if it was bravery or cowardice, if I was protecting myself or just avoiding the risk of being hurt again. It could be both, Jack said. Protection and avoidance often seem the same. The difference is whether you're eventually willing to take the risk again when the right person comes along. He looked at her as he said this, not subtly, and Mara felt something change. An awareness that conversations weren't just about passing the time. They were about building connection, trust, something that could become more if they allowed it. One night, a storm came. Not as severe as the night Mara had met Jack, but strong. Wind shook the cabin. Rain beat against the windows. Electricity flickered and went out. Generator? Jack asked. Could, but there are enough candles. I prefer it sometimes. Quieter. She lit candles across the room, soft, flickering light, and suddenly the atmosphere changed, more intimate. Jack sat on the sofa, carefully testing his shoulder movement. The wound was healing but still painful. Mara sat in the opposite chair as always, but the distance seemed greater that night, or perhaps too great. Can I ask you something? Jack said. Always. Do you regret it? Helping me, all the complications it brought? Mara considered. I should. Logic says I should. It brought danger, risk. Forced me to lie to the law enforcement officer. But, she paused. No, I don't regret it. Because for the first time in 6 years, I feel that life has a purpose beyond just existing. There's something that matters, and there is. She hesitated. There's someone here. And I didn't realize how much was missing until I had them back. Jack held her gaze. Me too. And I know the timing is impossible. That the situation is complicated. That we've only known each other for days under extreme circumstances. But Mara, there's something here. Between us, and I don't want to pretend there isn't. Mara's heart raced. Jack, you don't need to say anything, he interrupted. I just needed you to know that it's not just gratitude. It's not just the convenience of being stuck here. It's you. The way you think. The way you see the world. The strength you have even when you don't recognize it. And when this is over, when Marcus is arrested, and I can get out, I want to see if this is real. If the connection survives beyond crisis. And if it survives, Mara asked, her voice small, then maybe we both stop choosing isolation, and we choose each other. And in that moment, with candles fluttering and a storm raging outside, and years of solitude finally breaking, Mara realized she had already made a choice. Not words yet, but in her heart. She had let Jack in, not just into her home, but into her life. And no matter what happened, afterward, she couldn't undo it, and she didn't want to. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the partial resolution that came 4 days after that candlelit confession didn't just bring relief. It brought separation. And the devastating revelation that even when we make the right choices, even when we build something real, the outside world doesn't pause to allow us to process. Sometimes victory means losing closeness to the person who became important. And sometimes, hope for a future together requires first surviving a present apart. And Mara was about to learn that the transformation that had begun with Jack didn't end when he left. It was only beginning. 4 days after that stormy night of vulnerable confessions, Mara's satellite phone rang. A large, old-fashioned device she kept for emergencies, because regular cell phones rarely had signal in the mountains. She used it maybe twice a year. So when it rang aloud, strange sound that echoed through the cabin, they both immediately went on alert. Mara looked at the screen. Unknown number, not local. Area code she didn't recognize. Answer it, Jack said. It might be important, she answered. Put it on speakerphone. Hello, Mara Sinclair? Male voice, professional, authoritative, but not threatening tone. Yes. Who is this? My name is Agent Daniel Cross, FBI. I'm calling because I received a set of files sent from an IP address traced to your location. Files from Jack Moreno. I need to speak with him. It's urgent. Mara looked at Jack. She covered the phone with her hand. FBI says they received files you sent. Relief washed over Jack's face. Evidence had arrived, not intercepted, not ignored, arrived. He gestured. Mara handed over the phone. Cross, it's Jack Moreno, Sheriff Moreno. Good to hear your voice. I received files 3 days ago. It's taken time to verify, but I can confirm. The evidence is solid. Very solid. We're building a federal case against Mayor Dalton, Deputy Marcus Webb, and approximately 10 other officers and contractors. Conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, multiple charges, but I need you to go into witness protection immediately. Where exactly are you? Jack gave precise coordinates to a cabin, mountain outside Ashford, private property, isolated. Good, that helps. I'm sending an extraction team to agents. They'll arrive in approximately 2 hours. Are you safe until then? Yes, I'm with someone. Who helped me? Who's protecting me? We need to speak with her as well. Potential witness, and we need to make sure she's safe. She's here. Mara Sinclair, property owner, Mrs. Sinclair, Cross said. Yes. Thank you for protecting Sheriff Moreno. Your action was courageous. But now I need you to follow instructions carefully. 2 agents will arrive. Drive black SUVs, show identification. Don't let anyone else in. No one. If Deputy Webb or any other local officer shows up, you haven't seen Sheriff Moreno. Understood? Understood. And consider coming with us when we extract Sheriff. It might not be safe to stay. It's my house, Mara said. I'll stay. Pause on the line. Admirable, but stubborn. We'll discuss this when the team arrives. Stay safe, both of you. And she hung up. Jack looked at Mara. Complex expression. Relief mixed with something else. It's here. Evidence has arrived. And the FBI is acting. That's good, Mara said, trying to sound positive even, though her stomach was clenching. Very good. But it means I'm leaving. In 2 hours. And you? I'm staying, Mara said firmly. I already said, this is my house. I'm not going to be kicked out by Marcus or afraid of what might happen. Mara, if he finds out you hid me, then I'll deal with it. But I'm not going to run. I'm not going to let corrupt men force me from the place my grandfather left me. The place I chose as a refuge. No. Stubbornness that Jack recognized because he had a similar one. Okay. But when this is over, when Marcus is in jail and Dalton is being prosecuted and the danger has passed, I'll come back. I'll check that you're okay. Personally. Promise? Mara asked, echoing a word they had exchanged before. Promise, Jack said, and it meant something. Because in 4 days, Mara had become more important than should have been possible in such a short time. But crisis accelerated connections, forced vulnerability, and what they had built was real, even if timing was impossible. 2 hours passed quickly and slowly at the same time. They packed Jack's belongings, the little he had, the wallet Mara had kept, keys, the red USB drive that had saved everything, and they waited, talking less now, aware that separation was coming. Finally, the sound of vengeance. 2 black SUVs driving up a dirt road. They stopped in front of the cabin. 4 men got out. Dark suits, professional body language. One showed his badge through the window. Agent Daniel Cross. FBI Mara opened the door. Cross was a man in his 40s. Gray hair. Sharp eyes that scanned the cabin quickly, automatically assessing threats. Sheriff Moreno, Cross. Good to see you in person. Handshake. How's the injury? Healing. Thanks to Mara. Cross looked at Mara. Mrs. Sinclair, your actions saved his life, and the evidence you preserved will bring down a significant corruption network. You should be proud. I just did what anyone should do, Mara said, uncomfortable with the compliment. But most wouldn't, Cross said. And there's a risk. For you. If Webb finds out you harbored Sheriff. I understand risks. Even so, we offer protection. You can come with us. Stay in a safe place until Marcus and his associates are arrested. No thank you. But I'll stay. Cross studied her. Then he nodded. Stubborn, but brave. Respect. We've left 2 agents in the area. Discreet monitoring. If anything happens, you'll have support. He turned to Jack. Ready? Jack looked at Mara. Can I have a minute? Cross nodded. He went out onto the balcony with other agents, giving them privacy. Jack took Mara's hands. Thank you. For everything. For saving me. For hiding me. For trusting me when I had every reason not to. For being less alone for a few days. Mara finished, half smiling even though tears threatened. Yes, for that. And Mara, she paused, choosing her words carefully. What I said the other night, about when this is over. About seeing if it's real. I meant, it wasn't just a moment. It wasn't just gratitude. It's you. And I want to explore what that can be when we're not hiding from men trying to kill me. Me too, Mara admitted. But Jack, you're going back to life. Work, responsibilities. And I'm a hermit who lives in the mountains. Different worlds. Montana is 30 minutes from Ashford, Jack said. Not so different. And worlds can converge if we both want them to. He pulled her closer. Not a kiss, not yet. Not when he had to leave in seconds. But a hug. Firm, warm, a physical promise that the connection was real. Stay safe, he murmured against her hair. And when you come back, I'll still be here, waiting. They separated. Jack gathered his few belongings and walked to the door. He stopped. He looked back. Weeks, maybe a month with depositions and lawsuits. But I'll be back. I'll be here. And he left. He got into the SUV, and Mara stayed on the porch, watching cars drive down the road until they disappeared among the trees. And then she was alone again. Silent cabin. Empty in ways it hadn't been empty for 4 days. And Mara realized she had changed. She wasn't the same person who had found a bleeding man on the road. She had chosen to take a risk. She had chosen to trust. She had chosen connection over isolation. And she couldn't go back to who she was before. She didn't want to go back. Weeks passed. 3 weeks and 2 days, to be exact. Mara returned to her routine. Illustrations, walks, cabin maintenance work. But there was a difference. The satellite phone was always nearby. She checked messages obsessively and waited. Not passively, but with anticipation. And then, one Saturday afternoon, a knock at the door. She opened it. Jack was there. Not in uniform this time. Civilian clothes, jeans, button-down shirt, smiling. I said I'd be back. 3 weeks and 2 days, Mara said. But who's counting? Light tone but eyes, saying it all. Marcus, in jail. Dalton too. 7 others. Federal charges. Case is solid. They'll be in prison for a long time. And you, vindicated. Publicly acknowledged. But also, she hesitated. I also realized I don't just want to be sheriff. I want a life, outside of work, and I want to explore what we started. If you still want to. Come in, Mara said, stepping back, and find out. And Jack came in. And for the first time in 6 years, Mara wasn't alone in the cabin. Not because circumstances forced her, but because she chose to be, and choice made all the difference. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because the days that followed Jack's visit, when he finally returned and asked if there was room on the mountain for 2 lonely people, were the first moments of genuine happiness Mara had experienced in years. They were a transformation of hope into reality. They were a journey of discovering that the connection they had built during the crisis not only survived in normalcy but thrived. And it was precisely when they began to believe that the worst was truly over, when they completely let their guard down that a devastating revelation came. Danger had never ended. It was just waiting. And the impact of this hidden truth would be the ultimate test of whether what they had built was strong enough to survive a threat far greater than Marcus Webb. 3 weeks after that tense farewell, where Jack had left in an FBI SUV, and Mara had watched until the car disappeared, news broke. Not subtly. Regional newspaper headlines. Ashford mayor arrested in massive corruption scandal. And then national, small-town corruption network exposed by a courageous sheriff, Mayor Richard Dalton, a man who had governed Ashford for 3 terms, who was seen as a pillar of the community, arrested, handcuffed in front of cameras. Deputy Marcus Webb, 2. 5 other officials, 2 city council members, multiple contractors, all federally charged. Conspiracy, fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. Faces Mara, vaguely recognized from rare visits to town, were now on TV screens, paraded before a public in shame. And Jack Moreno, a hero, publicly vindicated. Interviews showed him firm jaw, serious eyes, explaining how he had investigated for 6 months, risking his life to expose the truth. I did what any law enforcement officer should do: protect the community from predators. Even when the predators are people with power. Mara watched from her cabin. The small TV, which rarely turned on, now showed his face, and she felt a strange pride. This man whom she had found bleeding on the road, whom she had sheltered and protected, was finally being recognized. But she also felt distance, because he was there, in the spotlight, being applauded. And she was here, alone again. As always. Days passed after the arrests. A week. 2. No contact from Jack. No calls. No visits. And Mara began to think, even trying not to, that his promise had been just words, spoken in a moment of gratitude or adrenaline, relief at surviving, but not truly meant. Why would he come back? He had a life, a career that was being resurrected, a reputation restored. And she was what? A hermit who had helped during a crisis, but who had no place in his normal world. 3 weeks and 1 day after Jack left, Mara had almost convinced herself that she had imagined a connection, that she had projected feelings into a life-or-death situation and confused intensity with intimacy. And then, one Saturday afternoon, a knock at the door. Familiar but unexpected. She opened it, expecting perhaps a package delivery or a ridiculous thought, Marcus, somehow having escaped from prison. But it was Jack, standing on the porch, not in uniform this time, completely civilian clothes, dark jeans, blue button-down shirt, leather jacket, smiling in a way that made her heart leap. "I said I'd be back," he said. Simple, as if 3 weeks of silence hadn't happened. 3 weeks and 2 days, Mara said, trying to sound annoyed, failing. Completely, because she was smiling too. But who's counting? "Sorry," Jack said, genuinely. Depositions, testimonies, meetings with prosecutors. The FBI had me in virtual lockdown. I couldn't call, I couldn't go out. But it's over now. Cases are built, trials scheduled, and I'm free." Pause. "And the first thing I wanted to do was come here. See you. Make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," Mara said. "Lonely, but okay. Can I come in?" She stepped back. "Sure." And Jack came in. And for the first time in 3 weeks, the cabin didn't feel empty. They talked for hours. Really talked. Jack told her about everything that had happened behind the scenes. About how the FBI had meticulously built the case. About how the evidence he had gathered, documents, recordings, financial records, was so solid that most of the accused had made deals rather than risk a trial. Dalton goes to prison for a minimum of 15 years. Marcus for 12. Others getting 5, 7, 10 years, depending on their level of involvement. About his public vindication. About how the department had been cleaned up, corrupt officers removed, new hires, and the city council offered me to stay on as sheriff, permanently, with a raise and complete autonomy. And you accepted. Mara asked. I haven't decided yet, Jack admitted. Because there's a bigger question I need to answer first, before making a commitment of years. What? She knew, but she needed to hear it. Jack looked directly into her eyes. Do you still want to be alone? Or is there room on this mountain for two lonely people to discover that maybe loneliness isn't necessary when you find the right person? Because if you want to explore what we started, then I accept. I'll stay in Ashford, I'll build a life here. Half in the city working, half here with you. If that's what you want. Complete vulnerability. Placing the choice in her hands. And Mara, a woman who had chosen isolation for 6 years as protection against pain, who had sworn never to trust again after her family betrayed her, realized the answer was obvious. It had been obvious since that stormy night when they had admitted their feelings. Maybe since the moment she had chosen to bring him home, instead of driving past. I think there's room, she said, trying to sound casual, failing because emotion leaked into her voice. In fact, I think there's considerable room. And Jack smiled, really relieved. And he pulled her into a hug that was promise, and celebration, and the beginning of something real. They spent the rest of the day together, talking, laughing, making vague plans of what shared life might look like. I'm not moving here full-time right away, Jack said. That would be too fast. But weekends, nights when I'm not on call, gradually works, Mara agreed, because I need to adjust too. 6 years alone doesn't disappear overnight. But I want to try, so we'll try. Together. And for the first time, together didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a possibility. But the following night, when Jack offered to go to town to get supplies, let me help. You've been doing everything alone for years. And Mara agreed. He left. 6 o'clock. Said he'd be back around 8. Ashford was 40 minutes away, an hour there, 40 minutes back. More than enough time. 8 arrived. Without Jack, Mara wasn't immediately worried. Traffic perhaps. Or she stopped to talk to someone. Small town, people chatted. 8:30, she started to get restless. 9, real worry now. She called his cell phone, straight to voicemail. Tried again, same result. 9:30, panic, beginning. Because Jack was punctual, responsible. If he was going to be late, he would call. 10. Mara was pacing through the cabin, unable to stay still, considering calling the police. But what would she say? A grown man is an hour late. Ridiculous. But instinct, the same instinct that had made her stop for Jack on the road, screamed that something was wrong. And then the satellite phone rang. 10:15. She picked it up immediately. Jack, not Jack, a male voice said, unfamiliar, harsh, but he's here, with me. And he'll stay alive if you do exactly what I say. The world stopped. What? Who is who I am doesn't matter. What I want matters. Listen carefully, because I'm not going to repeat myself. It turns out that Mayor Dalton wasn't at the top of the chain. Just middle. He answered to people. People with far more power and far more to lose than a small town politician. And now those people want evidence that your boyfriend, the sheriff, sent to the FBI, destroyed, completely, forever. I can't. You can, and you will. Because the original files are still on your computer. The FBI has copies, but the originals with metadata, timestamps, everything that proves authenticity are still there. And you're going to delete them completely. And then you're going to destroy the computer, physically, so that it can't be recovered. And if I do this, will you release Jack? If you do this, Jack lives. If you don't, he dies. And you live knowing you could have saved him, but chose to be stubborn. Pause. You have 24 hours. Tomorrow, at 10 o'clock at night, call this number, prove you deleted everything, and we'll give you instructions on where to find your boyfriend. Alive, more or less intact. But what if you don't call? Or what if the evidence isn't destroyed? His body turns up somewhere. You'll never find it. The choice is yours, Mrs. Sinclair. And I suggest you choose wisely. Because the people I represent don't make empty threats. They set examples, and she hung up. Mara held the phone, processing. Jack had been kidnapped by people connected to Dalton, people more powerful than they thought, and they were using him as leverage to force her to destroy evidence that could expose them. 24 hours to decide. Save Jack by destroying evidence that dozens of corrupt people would use to escape justice, or preserve evidence and let the man she loved die. And Mara realized that the impossible choice she had faced on the road weeks ago, to stop or drive past, had been nothing compared to this. Because this time, there was no good option. There was only a choice between the person she loved and the justice he had risked everything to achieve. And any choice he made would destroy her. But he had to choose, and he had 24 hours to decide if love was stronger than principles, or if principles were worth the ultimate sacrifice. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what Mara did in the hours following that phone call wasn't what the kidnappers expected. It wasn't what Jack probably would have told her to do if he could. It was a choice only she could make, a choice that would define not only their fate, but the kind of person she fundamentally was. Because sometimes, a moral dilemma isn't between obvious right and wrong, it's between two conflicting certainties, between love and justice, between saving one person or protecting hundreds. And the answer you choose reveals everything about who you are when everything is at stake. Mara didn't delete files, not immediately. First, she called the only number she knew she could trust. Agent Daniel Cross, FBI. A number he'd left with instructions. Anything suspicious, any threat, call immediately. It was 2 a.m. He answered on the third ring. Cross, it's Mara. Sinclair, Jack has been kidnapped, and they want you to destroy evidence in exchange for him. Silence. Then, tell me everything, every detail. And she did. Cross listened. And when she finished, he said, "Don't delete anything. Don't touch any files. This is federal extortion, kidnapping, and it suggests there's an additional layer of conspiracy that we hadn't uncovered, which is good. It means we can catch them too. But Jack, he'll survive, because we're going to find him. Trace the call, locate the kidnapper, and get him back before the deadline. Trust me." And Mara trusted, because what choice did she have? The FBI worked through the night, traced the call to the general location, mobilized teams, and 20 hours later, they found Jack, an abandoned warehouse, 2 hours out of town. The rescue was quick, professional. 2 kidnappers arrested. Jack alive, hurt but alive. And when they brought him back, when Mara saw him get out of the SUV with a new bandage but walking alone, she ran. She hugged him so tightly, it hurt them both. "I thought I lost you." "Never," Jack said. "You'll never lose me." And the kidnappers, they revealed everything under interrogation. Names of people above Dalton, state politicians, businessmen, a network that went far beyond Ashford, and evidence that Mara had preserved instead of deleting became key to exposing everything. 23 additional arrests. A scandal that shook the entire state. And Jack and Mara, they continued. Slower this time. No crisis forcing intimacy, but a deliberate choice to build something real. Jack accepted the position of sheriff. Mara continued illustrating. And gradually, he spent more time in the mountains. Until one day, it wasn't a visit. It was home theirs. Together. Not perfect, but real. Built through crisis. Strengthened by impossible choices. Tested by time. And the solitude they had both chosen for years. Replaced by the companionship they chose daily. And it was better. Much better. Look, if you've made it this far with me, if you've felt every moment of this journey with Mara and Jack, you know that this story is about much more than romance, suspense, or corruption. It's about what happens when we choose humanity over security. When we stop to help, even when it would be infinitely easier to ignore the past. When we trust our instincts that say this person matters, even when logic screams to protect ourselves. And about transformation that comes not from grand gestures, but from small, consistent choices. Choosing connection over isolation, vulnerability over protection, love over fear. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you want to continue following narratives about people choosing courage when it would be easier to choose cowardice, about love built on actions, not words, about the impact of one person making a difference when the system fails, then subscribing here is the way to continue walking with me on this journey. Because there are thousands of stories like Mara and Jack's, people saving each other in big and small ways, people choosing to be who they fundamentally are, even when it costs them. And telling these stories, celebrating this kindness, is how we remind each other that it's worth taking risks. And I need to know, are you with Mara? Are you with Jack, who risked everything to expose the truth? Do you believe that sometimes a stranger on the road needs help more than you need safety? Then comment below. I'm with you until the end. Let me see how many people truly understand that genuine kindness, the kind Mara showed when she stopped on that stormy road, is the most powerful thing that exists. That choosing to help even when it's dangerous, even when it's inconvenient, even when there are no guarantees, is what keeps us human. If this touched you in any way, at any point you felt Mara's despair at having to choose between love and justice, if you felt Jack's terror at being hunted by people he should have been able to trust, if you felt relief when the FBI found him in time, if you felt hope when you realized that isolation didn't have to be permanent when you find the right person to leave, so I know. Because stories like this need to be told. Truths about courage, kindness, and real love need to be celebrated. And the more we recognize and applaud people making the right choices, the more we encourage others to do the same. And there's a video here that continues in the same vein. Another story of an ordinary person making an extraordinary choice, of a sheriff fighting against a corrupt system, of love growing in the least expected place, about protection that is real, not performative, about trust built on consistent actions, about transformation that comes when we finally let someone see who we really are. Click and follow me there. Because journeys like this, where danger is real, but love is stronger, where isolation is broken by genuine connection, where justice eventually prevails because one person refuses to give EPAR exactly the kind of stories we need, that remind us why it's worth believing in people, why it's worth taking risks, why it's worth stopping in the rain when you see someone who needs help. And I want you with me for each one of them.